I covered the LAPD for 3 years for the Los Angeles Times, so I'm very familiar with its workings. And the LAPD, for all of its faults, is more than capable of dealing with these protests. They've been relatively mild. I think there have been fewer than 60 arrests, at least when I got up this morning, there were fewer than 60 arrests. There have been a few cars burned, which is, I'm not supporting or that in any way. But there are an estimated 1 million people who are in the country with limited or no permission in Los Angeles County. And let's remember that LA County is so populous that if it was a state, it would be the 11th largest in population. There are 40 states with fewer people than Los Angeles. There are suburbs of Los Angeles, like Long Beach, that have more people than Wyoming. So there's no need for the National Guard here. In addition, Trump is violating the law, which he does all the time because he doesn't believe in the law, he believes in him. National Guard troops can only be federalized at the request of a governor or if there is an invasion. Now, Trump's assertion is there's an invasion underway, even though the number of people crossing at the border now is at the lowest level it's been in something like 30 years. The problem with that as a matter of law is there's something called the political question doctrine. So if the president of the United States or his lawyers, or I should say the government's lawyers, they're not his lawyers, except in his mind, assert there's an invasion, federal judges are not allowed to say that's ridiculous. They have to hold a trial on that issue or avoid it completely. And hopefully we're at the point where some federal judge will stand up and say, this isn't a political question, this is a lying question. There is no invasion. No reasonable person would conclude there is an invasion and put a stop to this. But what Trump's really trying to do, and he hopes Saturday will play out for him, the No King's Marches, while he holds his birthday communist-style military parade in Washington, is that there'll be enough violence that he can justify suspending habeas corpus, which is a privilege in the Constitution, not a right. The problem there is that only Congress has the authority to suspend habeas corpus, which is the right to be brought before a judge. Without habeas corpus, you could be thrown in a dungeon. Just go read Dumas' book, The Count of Monte Cristo, or watch the most recent movie, which was a very excellent version of it. And you'll see what you can do without habeas corpus and why it's in the Constitution. Donald is in the stage of trying to consolidate his dictatorship. He's not there yet. He hasn't vanquished all of his foes, but he's vanquished a lot of them. And he's picked Los Angeles because it's got Los Angeles County, probably 1 million people who are not here with full permission. Roughly 1 in 4 Los Angelinos, the city residents, are 1 in 3 city residents, is foreign born. Some of them are naturalized citizens now. Trump, of course, wants to take away naturalized citizenship from anybody who's been protesting the government. That's part of the direction where they're moving. So, I mean, the whole aim here is to use Los Angeles to enhance Donald's power, prevent people from being able to get relief in the courts. And I'll issue one little prediction here. Usually when you have demonstrations, people get relatively minor charges. They're often dismissed unless they did something like set a car on fire or use a gun. And in this case, I suspect you will see felony federal charges brought by the Justice Department seeking 10-year or longer prison terms to try and intimidate people into not protesting. So keep in mind the fundamental rules of peaceful nonviolence. It's intended to provoke, trying to provoke the government, but you do not shove anybody. When you find people in the crowd who may be just badly behaved or agents provocateur, you get other people and surround them so they can't do harm, and you ask the police to come and take that person away. And you maintain absolute discipline. And that means, if you're all going to lie down and go limp and let them carry you off, you do that. You don't fight back. And hopefully that's what we will see. And hopefully we will see massive protests on Saturday. The bigger the protest, the worse for Donald. The smaller the protest, the better for his goal of arranging for him to be a dictator one, emperor one, king one of the United States.
I was saying before, David, that in California and Los Angeles, he's found, in a sense, a perfect situation because immigration is the issue on which he's found a lot of political success, right? It's one of the reasons he's ascended to the presidency. And the second thing is that the enemy, the blue cities, the way he views them as sort of disintegrating American dreams, he can play that big, especially as he foments unrest here, and he gets a character like Gavin Newsom who is up to the fight. It seems as though there are a lot of elements here that work for him politically.
Right. And why did he pick Los Angeles and not New York? So they've been doing some stuff in San Francisco, but why Los Angeles? Well, because his focus is on Latinos. The Latinos who voted for Donald Trump either don't like people who are like them or they got played here. The same way that Arab Americans who live in Dearborn who voted for Donald Trump because they thought he would be good for the people in Gaza got played. And in Los Angeles, you also have a governor who is a potential presidential candidate. I don't think Kathy Hochul, the governor of my state, New York, is. So that gives him further leverage. And I thought that when Newsom was being interviewed by Jacob Soboroff of NBC, and he said, "Here I am, come and arrest me," he was making it clear this was just political theater. Trump is simply trying to intimidate Newsom and Bass. And they're not going to be intimidated, and none of us should be either. You know, if you're not brave enough to stand up front on your own, that's okay. I understand that. Stand behind the people who are. Stand behind the people who are, but do not cower. If you cower, he wins. You cannot cower.
This is kind of reflective of a question that I was going to get to as well, and I noted this in my first half hour on the show today. The fact that, you know, even though this is a legitimate issue, it does distract from other things going on in the country. Professor Johnston, do you think the LA immigrant roundup is a distraction to prevent the media from discussing the big, beautiful bill, tariffs, and the Epstein files, asks Underdog? What do you think, David?
Absolutely, as well as Donald slipping on the stairway up to Air Force One. Remember when Joe Biden did that, it was like on a 24-hour loop on Fox News, and it made some of the other channels. Trump, same thing. Guess what? I'm 76. Men in their 70s and women in their 70s sometimes trip. In fact, I can remember tripping when I was in 6th grade.
Yeah, so, go ahead, Tony. Go ahead. You can run it. Yeah, go ahead.
But Fox, oh yeah, this is a video if you're watching, folks. He's up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. He catches his toe because he doesn't go high enough and has to grab the railing.
I mean, it happens. You're right. If it happened to Biden, they'd run it continuously.
It would be all over. And so Trump doesn't want discussion of the bill. He's been aided unintentionally by Musk, because Musk going after the big ugly bill and being generally right in his criticisms of it is going to force perhaps 1 or 2 senators who might have voted against it to go with Donald. After all, Musk doesn't have any power here. He's completely vulnerable to Trump, and he's misplayed this completely in the way he's gone about it. And if this bill gets passed, of course, the federal courts, until some judge stands up and says no, will lose their power to use contempt to enforce their orders, which would make the federal courts irrelevant to Donald Trump's dictatorial ambitions.
This is a huge thing that David just said, because this bill is embedded verbiage like this, right, that just further protects the president, in this case, Donald Trump. Yeah.
So you get rid of inspectors general, and that helps Elon Musk, have him do it. You get rid of career prosecutors who make professional decisions and say, no, you go prosecute this political enemy of Donald Trump, or you take Mr. Abrego Garcia, who was finally brought back to the U.S., and prosecute him on a bogus charge of trafficking. Apparently, all they have is that he drove a bunch of people who probably were in the country illegally from one job site to another because they work construction. They're in the country already. That's not trafficking people by any stretch. And the head of the criminal division of the U.S. Attorney's Office in Nashville, Tennessee, resigned as a matter of principle. And we've seen a number of prosecutors. And then I think I mentioned on your show, it may have been when you were gone, that the IRS now has a new budget for civil tax fraud, something Donald was found to have committed twice. He lost 2 trials over this years ago that nobody seems to know about unless they read my work. And in a civil tax fraud case, you have to have experts. You have to have accountants and economists sometimes, and maybe chemists to testify about the fraud. And the new budget for civil tax fraud expert witnesses is $1 per case.
Wow. Wow.
In other words, we're not going to prosecute cases of our friends. And that's what you're seeing go on is, vicious criminals and people responsible for multiple murders and huge drug traffickers. If they give money to Donald or matters Donald cares about, they get pardons and commutations. And people who have the thinnest reed of a case against them, they get heavily prosecuted. And that's what you're definitely going to see with at least some people who will be made examples of in Los Angeles by this administration. Yeah,
the old, to my friends, anything they want, to my enemies, the law.
Yeah.
This is just as an aside. Debbie says, when will Trump try to end Cinco de Mayo celebrations? Yeah, there's clearly an anti-Latino, a strong anti-Latino flavor to things. Yeah. David, how does this game out? Because I see what we're talking about is the legal counter moves that the governor of California and the mayor of Los Angeles that they can make. But this is a kind of a classic thing that we've seen just in the first few months here. Trump overreach, Trump lawlessness, and I mean the Trump administration generally across the board. And then the only way out is the court. And the court can be very slow in managing a situation. And by then there's a certain normalcy that's set in about the illegality.
Right. Well, there are some other tools here. I don't think they're very good tools. Karen Bass can direct the LAPD to not do anything at all to be cooperative dealing with the National Guard troops. How successful she'd be is a function of the current state of LAPD management.
By the way, just to interject quickly, David, because the chief of police in LA has said, we've received no word in any way to let us interact or coordinate with the National Guard. We have to support them, and there has been no effort. And that's true of the Marines as well. They're just being deployed without any sense of coordination.
Because the object here is chaos. It is not suppressing what are really pretty minor demonstrations. I mean, I've been in the middle of 6 riots in my life and have covered many, many demonstrations back to the 1968. This is not big stuff. And by the way, some of the biggest protests where they got onto the 101 freeway, those are downtown to City Hall. Drive downtown to City Hall. It's a ghost territory. There's just nobody around. There's no commercial business there of any consequence. It's government office buildings that fill up in the morning and empty out at 5 o'clock. So one of the tactics could be employed here is for the state to seek emergency orders that the National Guard has improperly been brought up. I'm sure there have been discussions of whether Newsom can issue an order to National Guard members saying you do not follow this directive from the president. They've probably rejected that as not a wise strategy. But I do think that Newsom, Bonta, the Attorney General, and Bass all need to look for the most aggressive responses they can, and they need to keep saying, this is just interference. By the way, I don't know if you've seen the TV footage of the National Guard's guys, but they were sleeping on linoleum or marble floors because nothing was done to prepare them.
Right.
Right. These are people who they're weekend warriors. They have jobs, they have families. All of this is just the vainglorious nonsense of the crazy man in the White House.
Yeah, and these are political props, and it should be grotesque and objectionable on a fundamental level to any American to have the military made up of people who we respect, who make serious sacrifices to be part of the military, and the National Guard to treat them as props. It really is theater. It's political theater. It should be objectionable to every American.
Yeah, it should be, and you know, the way the National Guard was organized was to prevent exactly this kind of abuse by the president. We have the Posse Comitatus statute from the 1860s. The U.S. military may not be used against American citizens. Trump's going to use the U.S. military against American citizens. And the important thing to understand there is that Donald is the law. In Donald's mind, Donald is the law. As he said in his first term, I have an article too that says I can do anything I want. And I encourage people who are listening or watching to just go to your browser and type in Article 2, U.S. Constitution, and read it. It basically says the President of the United States is the errand boy of Congress who does what Congress tells him to do, and he's commander-in-chief of the military. That's it.
There is a question here I'm seeing, David. Ask David K. Johnston to talk about the recent news that Trump did not win the 2024 election and the new lawsuits by New York State. Yeah, there are some.
I don't know anything about that, so yeah, I'll go and look, but I don't know anything about it. I mean, the margin of victory was 2 million votes, so we're not even talking about Richard Nixon, John F. Kennedy territory in 1960, which, if I recall, was roughly 118,000 votes. Lots of claims that the election was rigged, and political scientists have pretty well knocked that down and shown, no, Nixon lost in that year. And in any event, it's a settled issue at this point.
Yeah, it really is, sadly, a bit of a moot point from one standpoint. Nonetheless, we're having a statistician on, I think, in a couple of weeks, maybe even next week, and we'll talk more about this, and I'll get more into that case. But as David says, it really, sadly, is, it is what it is right now. Yeah. But it's interesting, David, just on that kind of the extension, to skip ahead in the movie, we've had several comments already today about Trump's move to bring the military into Los Angeles in a situation that they're clearly not needed for all the reasons that you've detailed already. It's an effort to normalize this move such that he could then extend it to other states. Somebody even in the chat suggesting he'll cancel the next election without cause. I wonder if you can speak to sort of that blueprint for the future.
Yeah. Well, Donald can't cancel the election, first of all. The states run the elections. One of the reasons you should have confidence in the election vote counts is it's a widely dispersed system. There's no central control of what's going on. I just voted in our local school board and school budget elections, and the new voting machines, there's a paper slip. It shows what the machine records, and you get to see it. Certainly a lot better than the old voting machines, but you do need a paper trail. But Donald can do a lot to interfere with the elections. I mean, this Republican legislation that a married woman who takes her husband's name cannot use her driver's license to verify that she's a citizen, and can't use her passport, apparently. It's going to be a real problem, and that's going to limit women. Well, historically, women have been more liberal in their voting than men, although Trump won the women's vote, which is just shocking to me. But that is part of this general voter suppression measure. A few years ago on your show, we talked about how in Dodge City, they went to a single polling place located more than a mile beyond the end of the bus line, so that if you didn't have a car, it was almost impossible to get there. And why was that done? Well, something like 1 out of 3 people in Dodge City, Kansas is Latino, and something like 1 out of 5 don't have a car. And so you're going to see all sorts of voter suppression measures. For years, the Republicans operated under a federal court order that they couldn't call up and say things like, if you turn up to vote, you're going to be arrested. They would make robocalls doing this. That was lifted. And immediately, very next election, the Republicans were back to these techniques of threatening people. I've literally had somebody walk up to me in person at an airport and ask me, can they arrest you if you go to vote? And I go, of course not. That's just designed to scare you. That's ridiculous. But most people are not steeped in these matters, and they don't know that.
Yeah,
things are going to get a heck of a lot worse before they get better, Mark. And right now, the only thing standing between us and pure tyranny is judges.
That's scary. That's really scary. I was making the point too, just on the election thing, that in communist countries and authoritarian countries, there are elections. They have elections.
Oh
There'll
yeah.
be an election. The question, it's good old-fashioned voter disenfranchisement, and the ways in which you've described. All of these things can sort of manage the outcome. All right. In our last couple of minutes, I want to just get to what's happening on the ground, and then what's likely to happen. It'll come down to the courts, and Donald Trump maybe better than anyone. You've been reporting on him and have written literally books on him, volumes on him. Does he back off from this, or does he lean into this because he's getting the fight he wants?
No, he's going to lean into this as long as it's in his benefit. And Homan has made it very clear they intend to do this every day until they've gotten the 1 million people they want to get in LA County out. Now, notice, by the way, that Donald insisted that our country has been invaded by murderers, rapists, escapees from prison, and mental asylums. And that's not who they're arresting, because that was nonsense.
They're going to Home Depot.
Right.
And getting day workers.
The people who come here, some of them legally and many not, hang around Home Depot and Lowe's and places like that, hoping to pick up day work, help somebody who's doing landscaping at their house for the day. And those folks are not out committing crimes. That you can point to this or that crime committed by young men who come here on their own without their families. But the rate of crimes committed by people in the country illegally is way below that of native-born American citizens, because you don't want trouble with the cops. That's going to get you thrown out of the country and sent back to where you were. This is not about anything but racism. By the way, you remove 1 million people from LA County, people who mostly do the menial, low-paid work, and you will crater the economy in California and damage the economy across the country. They don't care, because if you have a fortune of $100 million and the stock market drops, I can tell you what you're going to do. You're going to take the cash you got, and when you think it's at bottom, you're going to start buying back in, so you'll be richer than ever, and you're not worried about where your next meal is coming from. And we've cut SNAP benefits. I mean, who cuts food and nutrition benefits to pregnant women and babies in diapers? Oh, Donald Trump and the Republican Party. I mean, this has become the party of cruelty for the sake of cruelty.
But I love that you've made this point, because the industries that depend on the immigrant community are so extensive and so substantial.
They're all the industries, Mark. It's if you don't directly employ somebody, fine, but it's all the related industries that things work because of all those folks. And I'm not surprised you're seeing Mexican flags everywhere. Trump's trying to make it, and Homan are trying to make a big deal out of people are flying Mexican flags. California used to be part of Mexico.
Sure. But David, let me just say this, and I know we're down to our last minute with you, but I made the point before that sadly, there's a lot of national messaging and international messaging associated with the images out of Los Angeles. And when you see a burning car and you see all of these pictures of mayhem, the media, of course, focuses on a lot of that. And then you see Mexican flags being flown. I think it's a bad image. I just think it's a mistake. It's sad to say this, but I do think that Mexican pride has to exist without the Mexican flag in this instance being flown.
I think you're exactly right. I think the people who are bringing those flags are playing into Donald's hands. Here's the important thing, though, to keep in mind. Donald just said yesterday, it's like Minneapolis. They burned it to the ground. No, a couple of buildings got burned in Minneapolis, and we now know that the gunshots fired into the 3rd precinct of the Minneapolis police were fired not by Black Lives Matters protesters, but agents provocateur, and I forget if it's Proud Boys, the Oath Keepers, but one of those sort of groups were the ones who did that. And so you need to be very careful about agents provocateur here. Yep. But when you look, I was turning on KTLA Live and KABC Live to see the coverage, and there's a real serious lack of context. This is not the whole city of LA. This is not the Rodney King jury verdict riots. This is not 1965. This is very local, small, minimal amount of violence. And I fault television news, network, cable, and local for not giving the context of saying, the area involved in the city of LA is a fraction of 1% of the city is about 710 square miles. And we're not talking about 1% of that. We're talking about 100th of 1% of that. It's a tiny area.
It's a 4-block area. In '92, I was here in Los Angeles, and I welcomed the arrival of the National Guard. There was a sense of the entire city teetering on the edge, fires, people being dragged out of their cars, violence everywhere.
Well, certainly the side of the city below the Santa Monica mountain range,
Sure.
not in the valley, but on the area going down to the
But
harbor.
there was a sense that this violence could break out anywhere.
Yes.
That's not the case here
Yes.
at all.
Correct.
David, thank you. So generous with your time. I look forward to next week as well. All the
See ya.
best. All right, David K. Johnston. Hi, it's Mark, and I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell. You'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped, and please subscribe to our channel to help us save the universe.